Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So this is what we will be creating today. We'll be making this very simple health bar, and we'll be doing some good habits of creating it. And in addition to that, we will also having some debug volumes here, which allows us to take damage while we're on this ramp to see that it's actually working properly. And that's pretty much all. Welcome. In this tutorial, we are going to be looking at some UI, and specifically we're going to be creating a health bar. We will be looking at some simple aspects of the things that you need to create a health bar. We will look at some bad habits that you can make along the way if you have learned from other places. We will look at some good habits when it comes to having as alternative for those bad habits. And we will generally be discussing a little bit about how the functionality works and such, so you get a better understanding of it. So let's get started. Starting off here, I have just a simple map I have created, which has nothing in it. And we want to make use of some assets to begin with. So let's get some of those. So here we are on a page that has some free assets for us to use, both commercially and free. And these will do fine for our purposes. So these are an example of the things that you get in the pack. If you want to get this, I'll leave the link down below. It's the same pack we used in our other user interface tutorial. And you just click on download here if you want to get it. And you can either give them a gift in monetary value for downloading this if you want to, or you can just click the no thanks link if you want to try it out for free. And once you have this downloaded, we'll get back into the engine. Back in the engine with the assets downloaded, we can now go in and see what we want here. So you have we're going to be making a progress bar today for the health bar. A progress bar is a bar that can have different values assigned to it, and it will be more or less filled, giving you a representation of, for example, health or mana or anything like that. In this pack, we get a blue, green, light blue, and a red one. Since we're doing health, red makes most sense. In these different folders here, you can see that they are using 3 different images to portray the progress bar. The differences between them are the height on the different bars. So you can just choose one that you like. I'll get the number 3 one, for example. Drag and drop it into the project, so you have it there, and then we are done with that part. So now we have our 3 different images that we can make use of. Next, let's set up our health. In this case, we are going to be keeping it very simple. We're just going to be going into our third-person character, getting our blueprint for our character, and getting it up here. And we will be making a very simple representation of our health bar system. Hopefully you will have a better system than this, maybe something modular in a component or something like that. But for the purposes of keeping this simple, we will be having it as simple variables on the character. So current health will be our health denoted that we have at any specific point in time, and we'll make it of a type float, for example. Then we'll make another variable and we'll call this maximum health. We don't want to have just one health value, that's dumb. We need to have a maximum health value as well, because we need to know what are the limits within the health can be moving. And in addition to that, we may want to create some functionality that allows us to change this health. So for this, we will be making use of the damaged event. So whenever we get damage, if some other actor applies damage to our character, then we will be getting the event that's called any damage. So the event any damage will be triggered, and it will send in the damage that we're taking. And essentially what that means is that our current health, whichever value that is going to get subtracted by the damage that is coming in. And then after that, we want to set our current health to be the new value. However, this value could be a negative value, which means that we're adding to the current health. So we want to make sure that this doesn't exceed the maximum health. So what we'll do is we'll drag out from the result here, and we'll say clamp. And you get to see a few different clamp options. Clamp float allows us to assign two float values that the value needs to be within. So if it is below 0, it's going to be turned into 0. If it's below 1, it's going to be 1 in this case. We're, however, going to be using our maximum health instead as the top value for this. And after we have done that, we are then ready to set our health, because this value has now been properly adjusted for us and our needs. Now that we have done that, we have changed our health at some point, and now we need to have the user interface react to this. So how do we do that? Well, let's start off with creating our user interface for our health bar. We will go here and we will create a widget, and we'll call it, we'll make it of user widgets. We'll call it W for widgets underscore health bar. And in this case, we are going to be doing it a little bit simpler. We're going to be having this represent our whole screen, not just the health bar. Actually, nah, never mind. We'll do it properly. We'll make another user widget, which we will call, we'll make it of user widget type W underscore HUD. So this will be our HUD, and then our HUD will be containing a health bar. We can make it that way, it's fine. So let's start off with the health bar. Our health bar here, we want to have a progress bar for, and that is the whole point of this health bar tutorial. How a health bar works is fairly simple. It's just a matter of having a value, which in this called %, and it will have a value between 0, which is empty, and a value of 1, which is full. So any value in between this is essentially how much the bar is supposed to be filled. And you can see it as a representing of percentages. So 1 stands for 100% and 0 for 0%, of course. You can also choose some different options of how you want to fill it. If you want to fill it from the left side, right side. If you want to fill it from center, filling outwards. Oops, hold on. There we go. So you can see it like that. You have a bunch of different options here to begin with. And you can make, of course, more advanced things than this as well. We'll keep it from left to right, just keeping it simple. And you can also choose some bar styles and some paddings and all kinds of different things like that. You can also change the color you want to fill it with if you want to have a color for this. We are, however, going to be making use of images for this. When you're using images for your progress bar, you probably don't want to have the fill color and opacity set to a color, because that will tint the colors that you already have in the images. Of course, this might be what you're after, but if you want to see what it's supposed to look like, you want to have white color, so it doesn't influence it. Now, currently it is also displaying our object here, progress bar, a little bit too big, too large. So we'll change this from fill screen to desired, and we'll get something along the lines of how large it will actually be. In this case, it will probably be too small as well, but we'll start off here. We open up style and background image and fill image over here. Here we can put in our images for our progress bar. So if we put in our background static as our background image, this will be whatever is not filled, and then our fill image will take whatever color we have. In this case I chose the red one. We'll put it in there, and if we zoom in a little bit, you can see what it looks like if we change around the values now. And what I mean about the color over here, you can see that if we were to change color now, it will alter what the end result will be, and this might not necessarily be what you're after. So that's why we chose white. We also go up here and we change the draw as to be images for both of these. And you can choose a tint if you want to as well, so you can have a tint for the background specifically, or a tint for the filling color specifically if you want to as well. So those are separately controlled here if you want to have them done that way. Now, if we want to have a specific size for this one, we can always just go to our progress bar and we can choose to wrap it with something like a size box. And then in the size box, we can go and say we want to have a width and height override, and we can say something like, I don't know, maybe we want to have a 250 length and maybe a 40 height or something like that. That's what that would look like. And yeah, we'll see what it looks like on the HUD as a whole in a moment. So let's say that this is what we want to have, and let's go back to our HUD and actually implement this in there. So we'll go to our, where did I create these widgets, I wonder? I have put them in the blueprints. Let's move them back to the health bar folder. Opening up the HUD one, we can now see that this is our HUD, and we can add a canvas panel here just so we have something to orient and anchor things with, like so. And since we have now created a user created widget, we can now drag in our health bar, and we can say we want to have it in the top left, for example. We click size to content to respect whatever settings that the actual widget has, which is where we have the size box and such. Then we'll say we want to anchor it to the top left, since this is where we want to keep it, so it makes sense. And we maybe want to have it something like 50 pixels to the right of the edge and 50 pixels from the top of the edge, something like that. That'll be fine. Now let's actually put the HUD into the world. Now we can do this in many different places. We can do it in the level blueprint, the character blueprint, the controller. Putting this in the level blueprint, for example, would be really dumb because it doesn't really belong there, because health belongs to our character, it doesn't belong to the level. So what we're going to be doing in this case is we're going to be making use of our blueprint character and saying that it should be putting this into the world. So when the character comes to life, we'll say begin play event, and we'll say we want to create a widget. And we want to create the widget that's called HUD. And we want to add it to the viewport. So this will take the reference of the widget that we've created and place it into the world. However, this will work for most cases. You don't always need to put in a player controller object reference here, but it could be good to do it explicitly anyway, because sometimes you can run into issues. When it comes to this, we are currently in a pawn right now, so we can actually just get controller, and we will get our corresponding controller without having to use a hard-coded number to say which controller we want to have. The problem with this is that we will be getting a default controller, which is not necessarily a player controller, and only player controllers are allowed to have UI elements. So this we can cast and say, essentially check, is this a player controller? And if it is, then we can say, well, that's good, and then we want to create this widget. So if we were to have an AI that had the same character, this would fail because it would be run by an AI controller, not a player controller, and it would not be trying to add something like a UI to its interface. Normally casts are not really great to use. However, when you use them, make sure that you use them under the right circumstances. In this case, we're going to be using it at event begin play, which means it will be run only once, so it's not really that bad. So in this case, I will allow myself to do that. Yes, so now we should essentially have, when this spawns in, we should be creating a widget of the HUD, and we should be displaying it for the character, and that's exactly what we see. So now we have a widget up there that's displaying our health. It is, however, not moving, and we need to change that. So first of all, we need to go to our character, and we need to actually set some values for our character. So let's say we want to have a value of 100 as our current health when we start. And let's say we want to have something a little bit different for maximum health. Let's say we want to have 150. That means that we have 2/3 of our life. We now want to make sure that this value can be affected, which we already have put in logic for here in the any event. So we just need to have damage done to us. Going out here, clicking the plus to add an object, we can type in pain, I believe it's called, pain causing volume. So here we have a pain causing volume, and we can put it on the ramp or something like that. So so we know where it is. We'll scale it a little bit so it covers pretty much the whole ramp. That should be fine. So if we go into this volume, we should be taking damage, and the details of this volume will determine how much. So here it says damage per second 1. So if we put it to maybe 10, then it should be doing 10 damage per second. So if we walk into it now, we can take damage. However, we don't see that because our health bar is not connected to our health, and our health is not being displayed. But to demonstrate that this is working, what we can do here is we can add a print after we take damage to say what our current health is at any point in time. So anytime we take damage, we will be printing out in the top left. And we run up here and we can see that we are going from 90 to 80 to 70 to 60, and everything is working fine. Okay, so now we just need to connect the UI to have this information. And if you were to watch some tutorials and they will teach you really bad things to do, they will go and say, hey, we have a progress bar over here, we want it to set the percentage here by doing a binding, and they can say create binding, and it creates a function which essentially says update my value. How this works is, and I'll demonstrate it just to show what this does. It needs to get its character. So in this case, we can get the owner of this this widget. That means we get the player controller here in this case. Then we can say we want to get its what is it? Something pawn. Get controlled pawn. So now we have gotten the controlled pawn here, for example. And in this case, we don't know what kind of pawn this is. We need to have a specific pawn that's called third person character, because that's where we define that we have a health. So then we want to cast it to a third person character, and we hook that up. And at this point we can say get health, for example, because now we know what class it is. After you have done this, you need to have this value in between 1 and 0, which means that you need to get health, and you need to get the maximum health. And then you need to make a calculation saying this divided by another value is our value. So current health divided by maximum health will give us a percentage value. And then they do this, and everything is fine essentially. So when they play now, you can see that we have our health bar is actually moving. Now, this might look good and fine, but I will try to demonstrate why it is not. First, we will remove the print that we have in our character, because we don't need to see when we take damage. And instead we'll do this. We'll go to our health bar, and before we do a return here, we'll put in a print saying health binding was called. And then we'll press play. Now, hopefully this should be raising some red flags in your head, because pretty immediately our screen was filled up. The reason for this is a binding is called every frame, which means that even though we didn't stand in our volume here taking damage, we were still updating it every single frame. If we assume I was playing at 120 frames per second, this means that this logic, which was printing out this, is run 120 times per second completely in vain. In addition to that, it's actually doing this calculation 120 times per second in vain. It's also doing this getting and casting to a character, this check, every frame 120 times every second. So this is a really, really bad way of doing things. This is essentially the cardinal sin when it comes to UI. If you see this being done, just run in the other direction and don't come back from wherever you saw this happening. So what we will be doing instead is something a little bit more performant, although it might be slightly more advanced. But bear with me. First of all, we're going to be going back to our designer and making sure that we kill this binding by clicking remove. We'll compile, and we'll go back to the graph and make sure that it is gone. We have a get percent function here still. We'll delete it there as well. So the binding just points to the function which is supposed to calculate something, while the function itself is just the functionality. Okay, so what we need to do here is essentially saying every time we have our health updated is a point in time where we want to tell our user interface to change its values, right? Otherwise it's not really, doesn't make sense. So in this case we only have one place where we're changing values, and that is in this place. And what we can do then is we can say we want to have an event dispatcher, for example. We can say that health changed is sort of a broadcast that we're making, and we want to do it whenever health is changed. And we can say that we want to have an input to it, and we can say it's supposed to be a float. We also can say that this is going to be our percentage health. This means that we can drag this out, we can say call, and we can say call this broadcast whenever we have taken damage, because that's one of the times when we can have our health changed. So now we need to send in what kind of percentage health that is. So we're going to be doing the same calculation as before. We're going to take a current health and we're going to be dividing it with our max health, just like we did in the binding before, and then we're going to send it out. So now whoever is listening to this will also get the information that this is our current percentage health. So our health bar makes sense that it would try to listen to this. So what can we do then? Well, when the health bar is created, so on the construct here, let's remove tick and pre-construct. We can say we want to get owning player, but we can get our owning player pawn immediately. This is the short way of doing both. I showed you first a step of getting the controller, then the owning pawn, and yeah, you can just do this to get the owning player pawn immediately, because we know it is a player pawn because we are in a user interface. And now we need to have to be able to listen to this event, this broadcast that we're doing on our third person character. The third person character is the type of class that has this broadcast available to it. So we need to make sure that we are listening to that type of, we have that type of class essentially. So we need to cast this, and we need to cast it to a third person character. Since this is a construct, it just happens once. This is okay-ish. Then once we have that, we can say we want to bind. Now bind, we can bind on any damage. That would give us the situation of that is when we are taking damage. However, we get sort of a race condition, because if we bind on the same event here, that happens essentially before we are calculating our health, and we want to make sure that we are listening to an event that has happened after we have done all the calculations. In addition to that, we want to have our percentage health. Listening to this event, we would only get our damage, and we will have to get our current health and then do the calculations ourselves. But you could do it that way as well. You could do just listen to this event and then don't have, well, any of this logic for it, and then just do the calculation in the bar. But yeah, we're doing it this way now. So bind, and then we say health changed. So now we're saying we are wanting to listen to that event happening. When that event happens, we can just drag out here and add an event. We can say health has changed, and will get us an input, the value that we have from the broadcast. And we can say to our progress bar, set %. And it will change the values. So if we now run here, we should be able to run into this pane volume, and you can see that we get the health updated and everything is working fine. And to make a comparison then to see how much this is changing and working in the background compared to the binding, we can add a print here to say that we have changed health. And you can see how often that is done in comparison. So you see, it doesn't do much very often at all. So that's how you set up a proper health bar. The only thing here now that you might be noticing is that we have a pre-filled value here. Let's make this clear and make it 100%. And this value is differing from our value in our character, which is currently starting at 100 out of 150, meaning at 66%. So when we take damage, this is only currently being updated when we take damage, because that's when this is being called. In here, when we're doing the damage, we're calling it. Which means that to begin with, it will be showing us the wrong health bar. It will be showing us a full health bar, and when we take 10 damage, you can see it jumps to its actual value. And that's simply because we don't actually update our health bar widget immediately. If we wanted to have some basic functionality for this, we could, when we're doing our begin play here, everything is set up for our character and we have the proper widget and everything like that, we could just call this event dispatcher, saying our health has changed, and then getting the information here. Now you get the situation here where we're trying to do the same thing as we wanted to do before here. So what we can do is we can create a function, and we can say get percentage health. We can click it as a pure function, meaning it becomes a get function. And we'll do a return node, and we'll say we want to return a float value. That is the percentage health. And now instead we'll put this calculation here. So we'll get our current value, maximum value, we'll divide it, put them together, and then we'll just hook them up like so. Going back to our event graph now, we can, instead of, first of all, we can use our function here to get percentage values. We just hook it up here. And then we can remove this from being done over here because we don't need this part now. So we'll just do our, sorry, not that one. We want to do this one. Get our function and send it in here instead, so we don't have duplicated code. So now when we press play, you can see that the health bar is immediately changed to whatever value we start with, and then it will continue to change if we take damage or get healed or anything like that. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.